Hello, everyone. Welcome to Awake. Now what? Tonight our guest is Aliyah Marr, quite a fascinating lady, one of those Renaissance multitask kind of people. So, hello, Aliyah.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing
So happy to
fine.
be on the show.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Now, how about telling people about you, since you've not been on here before?
Well, it gets harder and harder to describe who I am. And I think when you go down the rabbit hole of creativity, and you just get to the point where you don't have many limits anymore. And so it almost seems like any way you describe yourself is like a container that you kind of artificially constructed around yourself, and it doesn't really describe what's in it, and it's kind of like a black hole that's in it anyway. But my topic is primarily creativity, and I talk about how people can step into their creative selves. My contention is that everyone is creative naturally, and that we're creating everything as we live, and so why not be conscious about what we're creating, and that's everything in our lives. So the struggle to be conscious, of course, is one of those things that we're born this way. We're born to make this journey back to the beginning, and as we progress on this journey, we get to the point where we finally understand that it's about rediscovering who we were when we were babies. The natural self, and the natural self is the creative self. So I have several definitions for creativity because creativity is my subject, and so there's the innate creativity that we all have. Now, and then you can progress and you become consciously creative, and most artists are consciously creative. They're not just conscious that they're creative; they're also creatively conscious. But my background is that I started out as an artist. I went to school in France at one of the most famous art schools in the world, and my parents were hesitant about letting me go, but I got accepted. And my way of getting to go, because it was kind of sheltered, was to tell them that it was the only thing I was capable of doing. Art was the only thing I could do.
Okay.
Yeah, and they looked at me and they're kind of pitying me, and they let me go.
Oh, you started out as a manipulator real young, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Well, they let me go because my parents would have made me take up a profession that was more practical, and all parents want to kind of protect their children from becoming a bum artist, but because I told them it was the only thing I could do, and I really didn't know at the time. I thought really that was all I had talent in, and then of course through the passage of life, I found out that the skills that I applied, that I learned in art, were things that I could apply to anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so art was like this perfect playground for developing creativity and developing skills that I would later on use and apply in different ways. Like, for instance, I learned to be a fine artist or a painter, and of course printmaker and things like that. And then I took that and applied it to illustration, then applied it to design, right? And I'm still using the same kinds of tools and the same pattern of success and the same connections that I made. Later on, I became a teacher of design at top art schools in the United States, and e-learning specialist. I worked in feature films, as a designer for feature films. So many different things that I went into. And then a few years ago, I was in a meditation, and I got the message that I was going to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, great, okay. Never really written much before except poetry, and this is the way it works for me. I just finally one day, after a couple years of knowing I was going to write a book, I said, okay, well, I guess it feels like it's the right time to write the book. What's it going to be on? Well, I don't know. What do I write a book on? And, in my meditation that had been done like 3 or 4 years before where I got the message to write the book, I knew that what I wanted in life was to take my creativity to another level. I wanted to take my art to another level. At the time I was envisioning whole interactive art rooms, a room you would walk into and the room would interact with you. And I was envisioning these art projects that went beyond my means to create. I mean, I could technically maybe do it because I learned how to do programming, and I was actually, I was part of the dot-com bubble, and was really high up during the dot-com bubble, and interactive design is what I was a specialist in. So I was envisioning that at the time of the meditation, and I'm like, well, in order for me to get to the next level, I have to become known. I can't be this little hermit working by myself anymore. So it's time to come out in the open, which for somebody who's initially shy was really scary. But 3 years later, huh?
Tell me about it. I've always been shy.
You've been shy too, and you learn how to act, and that's in my book too. I learned how to act out of my shyness. So I get to the point of writing the book. What's it going to be on? I'm like, well, what is the one thing that sort of brings all of us together? My whole life experience, I'd always had a lot of interest in philosophy and in a perception, as just sort of like all kinds of interests in science, quantum physics, you name it, I have an interest in it. And with all these interests and everything like this, what would my book be on? What would be this thing that ties it all together? What's the thing, this major theme of my life? Well, I do know creativity. I do know how to create. I know how to make both sides of my brain work together. Not just a right brain thing. It's not just a left brain thing, but I know how to make them work together. And I had never written a book before. I'm like, well, I'll write about creativity. So that's what I did. And I just sat down to write, and it was amazing because I'd never written a book. And I wrote an outline, and then I was given space and time to write this book, the gift of a year. And so I would go and, go out of where I lived, and I'd go sit in the library and write, and I just open up the computer and start writing. Mm-hmm. And soon after the outline, it was thrown away. It was like 3 months in. I'm like, I'm no longer following this outline. I don't know where it's going. It was the most magical process. And all the time I'm writing it, I'm getting this nice feedback loop. And this feedback loop, I call this a feedback loop of, that whenever I create something, I get a feedback loop, as long as I'm not in too much judgment while I'm creating it. And the feedback loop is this thing of, wow, look at this thing that's coming out. It's like you're birthing this baby. You had no idea you were pregnant, and you're like birthing this beautiful, incredible child, and you're like, oh, that came out of me?
Yep.
And that's the feeling that you get. But the feeling that I had when I was writing the book, which had never happened during all the work I'd done as a painter, and certainly not as a designer, because it's more applied creativity than it's pure creativity. It's done for a purpose and for a commercial reason. But writing a book was just sheer joy. And the feedback loop that I was getting was that I was getting the right information at the right time, and that I was doing the right thing by writing it. So it's kind of a mystical sense. And then, in that one, I guess I had it was about a year and 9 months later that the book was finally published. That's called...
you birthed an elephant.
I birthed an elephant,
It's called almost your gestation period, so...
Well, it's very interesting because I call that the incubation period. There is an incubation period for things. Certain ideas come out from different people at the same time. But in the creative process, when one is focused on creating something or making something, there's a period before you actually make it I call the incubation period.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had certain things incubate the book incubated for about, I can't remember, it's like 3 or 5 years. And I've had things incubate for as long as 10 years without even, they just sit in the background, sort of on the back burner.
Mm-hmm.
It's a marvelous process because the creative person has this clear sense, when they get into the flow of creativity, they have a clear sense of rightness, of doing what they're here to do, and it is a feeling of being in the flow with your own process and with, what you're here to do. And so when I talk to people, I have clients where I coach them through their process. I tell them sometimes that, a lot of times people come here and it takes them a long time to figure out what they are here to do. For me, I pretty much knew really early, and and now I have a really clear mission on, how it is I help other people, because I help them step into that creative self. The creative self is a natural self, and the natural self wants to play with everything. It wants to have fun. It wants to be in a state of flow and bliss and joy, and that's what you get in the act of creating anything, really. But as the pieces as you become more evolved and you become more sophisticated, as a creator, you don't put as much mental stuff on what you're creating. You simply allow what needs to come through to come through. A lot of people approach from the mental side, so that when they mentalize the creation, it actually kind of kills it. It becomes too intellectual. It doesn't really come from the soul. It doesn't come from the gut, And so you can kind of, an artist would know, or somebody sort of on the conscious artistic side would know when something has soul, when it doesn't have soul. You can feel it. But that's the joy of creating a book. My book, the first book, is called Parallel Mind: The Art of Creativity. And then I created in the last fall I created 3 more books really quickly. I'm not done with the last one, but the second book is called Pocket Parallel Mind, which is it's really designed for people that are consciously know their artists. It's kind of a funny book, but it's based upon the quotes from the first book. So there's little excerpts. So it's like a quote a day book. 365 pages, a quote per day, and it's about the process. It's about being creative. It's about the joy of being a creative person, and also some of the pitfalls as well. So that's the second book. So I've talked for a lot, so you have any questions about that?
Yeah, in your Parallel Minds, I think we need to pursue this. You say, what is true creativity and how does it relate to the normal functioning of the human brain? Now, in my experience, basically creativity sort of seems to be that leap that you take once you've put so many pieces together, and then you sort of, what do they call it, an intuitive leap to the next one?
Yeah.
And, I do the right left brain thing, too, a lot.
Yeah.
But I think maybe pursuing that and giving that link, because the human brain in your head, to me, is nothing but your CPU. And your real mind is outside that. And that's where the inspiration, all the rest, comes from.
Yeah, so, I'll make some definitions here that you probably could clear it up.
Right.
What of course, I'm working on. Most artists that get to a certain level kind of work on a kind of a level of channeling almost. And so with the mind that you're talking about, that's outside of the human, or apparently outside of the human, is one way to express the mind. The way I see it is that, and this is what used to happen to me when I was meditating, I would meditate every night. And what I found after I hit to a certain space is I was picking up signals from other people. I was picking up what I call mind static, because we don't just have our minds in our brains, we share the static, we share the pathways. And so what I see the brain as, a very sophisticated radio. And I see it as a shortwave radio that can transmit and receive. And so the brain is really good at that. Now, when you talk about right brain versus left brain, you have the left brain is more like the computer. That's the CPU. It's data, it's storage. It only knows the past and the future, and it's not capable of being present, really. It's sort of like just a data storage device.
Right.
The right brain seems to be the one that, and I make this definition because even though it's not really like this, left brain, right brain, there's cross connections, and not everything's stored. But in general, in the right brain is the one that's really kind of hooked in to the mind, the universal mind, or the conscious sea. I see a sea of consciousness is what I'm seeing. And so we have this receiver in our right brain that allows us to pick things out. People used to think that they used to ask me, where do you get your ideas from? You have so many ideas, And at the time I was living in France, and I like to use sign language sometimes, and I say, I just, I reach up in the air and just grab something, and reach up somewhere else and grab something else. And to me, that's what we're capable with our radio receiver brains. Tap into this huge ocean of awareness, ideas, consciousness. It can be static. I would pick up whole conversations. Sometimes I'd pick up whole a view of something, like a remote viewing thing. And we're capable of receiving all that. The thing is that if it just stays in the right brain, it's kind of like dreamlike, and at best, it can't really come out. It can only be, flow through, because the right brain doesn't hold on to anything. It's totally in the moment. So what one has to do is develop the white matter in the brain. If like they say women have more white matter than men, and certain people have more, like autistic people don't have much white matter, and the white matter is like the cables that connect the two, say, CPUs. Okay, you've got on one side, you got the right brain, and on one side, you got the left brain, and what connects the two is the white matter between the gray matter. And that white matter is something, I don't know that you can develop it, but what I'm saying is that that's what is necessary to bring it somehow to the left brain. The inspiration comes in from outside of us, really. It's caught by the right brain, and then because what gets caught by a particular right brain, say my right brain, are certain things that I'm already set up to catch, Mm-hmm. So I'm already ready to catch these things. So I'm kind of looking for them. And I'm not looking for them, like consciously looking for them, but I start to notice things that are aligned with things that I like, that I have a preference for. And so those things are right for me to catch, and I will catch those things and I bring them into the left brain, and there the left brain interprets what the right brain has received. Now, to some degree, it flattens it out so much that, it can only point to the vastness of what the right brain has received. But that pointing alone is enough to sometimes trigger other people through your work, through your writing, through your art, music, poetry, whatever that you're doing. And that's the amazing thing about communication. The left brain, I believe, its function, it's taken over, and so it's trying to do something it's really not set up to do, which is to guide us. We are supposed to be guided by spirit or the right brain, by our predilections, by our interests. We're not supposed to be guided by fear or by data. And yet the left brain has taken over because this is a left brain society, and we don't value right brain stuff. It's too amorphous, too vague, too woo woo, airy fairy, too flaky, as we accuse artists of being. But the left brain is the one that really should be. It's like we took the what do they call it? The mail clerk at the bottom of a corporation. We took him and we promoted him to president.
Sometimes that might be the right move.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the corporations would all benefit from that. But what I'm saying is that he's a newbie. He doesn't know he doesn't know how to manage a whole company. And so we've taken basically somebody who really only did data work and put him up to the top. And that's not the proper position for the left brain. The left brain, I believe, is really only in this example, in this particular example, it's really the personal assistant of the right brain. So the personal assistant executes, and he does also something really important. He translates the amorphous stuff from the right brain into something that can communicate with other people. Right. And it's not to say that the left brain's not important. It is, but it needs to be in the right position. Yeah. Yeah.
So I agree with all of that 100%. The thing is, our society has turned so much over to the left brain that it's basically on the verge of a nervous breakdown.
Oh, well, and, I can.
Yep. The whole thing is, it has its place. It actually is happy when it's in its place, just like everybody else. Everybody is capable of doing different things. Everybody down the line is capable of being creative, of being psychic, and all those other labels they use. To me, the principles used in art, my particular media happens to be leather, and I just love doing bas reliefs on it, and all that kind of stuff. And the thing is, all of those principles, the willingness to think outside the box, the willingness to express what you're seeing or feeling in your own way, are applicable across the board. And
go ahead.
Go ahead. And it's so many people have gotten caught up in their left brain, and the left brain is stressed enough. Its job is to take this amorphous stuff and, like you said, give it some sort of a structure so you can communicate it to others. But its job is not to smash it, destroy it, whatever.
Well, in my book, I have the chapters, the numbers of the chapters are really important. And I go through, chapter 1 basically explores what is creativity. Chapter 2 explores the duality that we've got set up here and how we basically, the inner self, the child self, I explore, there's 2 cells that we actually set up. We set up the inner child, which is the basic self that we all begin with. And we grow onto that, or grow next to it, an adult self. The inner child should remain childlike. And the adult self is basically a guardian for that child to kind of make sure that wherever the child plays, because creativity is play, that wherever it plays, it's safe, that it can, and it sets up a structure and tells it like, oh, well, you need to get to such and such on time, so we need to wrap up right now, that kind of thing. And that's the healthy, creative individual. But there's very few of us that really are at that point. Most of us have evolved an adult self through, this weird upbringing that we all have in this society.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, and I'm not accusing any parents of anything because they do the best job they can. But the adult self, the guardian turns into a guard, right? And the inner child, instead of being childlike, it becomes childish and rebellious against the adult self. And so that's chapter 2. It talks about how do you make these two work together instead of at odds with each other, because that's what's causing, physical breakdown, mental breakdown, emotional breakdown. And I cover those in subsequent chapters, how you can use art to, and I give exercises that are fun. They're like conceptual art pieces. How you can use the practice of art, any art form, and I cover all the art forms and give examples for all of them. How can you use the practice of art to end up with a healthy self, a healthy creative self that's working in the same direction, playing and working in the same direction? The next chapter is it's called Body and Soul, and that's about how can you change your body with creativity. And then the fourth one's about the mind. How do you get your mind to be working in tandem again with the rest of you? Fifth chapter is about emotions. Sixth chapter is about sex, which everybody always goes to that chapter first. And it's called The Secret of Sex. And I got all the way through the book, and I thought I was done.
Surprise.
And and then I'm like, well, wait a minute. I haven't written about how sex plays into this whole thing, because it's said by the Toltecs, the only energy that we have really is sexual energy. So that's all the energy we really have. And
because sexual energy is the energy of creation, so it's always
exactly. So if I'm writing a book about creativity and I leave out sex, well, geez, I mean, not to say that. Well, so I finally wrote about how to, and this was amazing. As I'm sitting down to write this, I'm like, like most of the chapters of the book, I have no idea what's coming out, and it just comes out. And and I ended up with this incredible piece about how desire and sex moves us. And so that's an interesting chapter. The 7th chapter is sort of sums up things, and the 8th chapter, again, sort of brings everything back together. So the 7th chapter actually talks about what it's like to be a conscious creative, which is, I've kind of walked people through the rest of the process and how you can use art in different ways. You can use art as an expression. Secret of Sex actually talks about how to dive into your art in a sensual way, how to really, when you were talking about your leather, you're working with leather, I could feel the leather,
Yeah.
And see, that's the thing, is that people forget they're not really here. And they don't, and they're in their head so much they're not here. But the process of creating art and allowing yourself to be totally, sensual with your work is one way to be here now. One of the most practical ways to be here now. I used to say about Buddhism, I'm attracted to Buddhism, but I used to say, well, it's too much sitting down for me. I can't. But art is a moving meditation. Art is in the moment, every day, never stop, ongoing meditation and chance to evolve and develop oneself through an art form. And you don't have to be focused on evolution. It happens naturally. You naturally evolve because of the work that you're doing.
Right. Well, I think, to me, since we all are creators, and it's a given that you're creating your life by the choices you're making,
right?
Whether it's conscious or non-conscious, our master artwork is our life.
Absolutely.
And people need to focus on that and understand that, because once you do, look at your life. What are you creating?
And yet that's a big picture for people, creating our lives, and then we, get in this whole thing, I'm so responsible for every thought, and if that's in front of me, then it's because I brought it in. Yes, okay, all that. But the wonderful gift of art forms, because these first books are about pure creativity. I get into applied creativity in subsequent books, but these first books are about pure creativity, which is art done for no other reason than the innate desire to make something, than the innate natural urge. This is natural for us. We're natural creators. This is what we're born to do. And so this natural desire to do this, if we practice with an art form, be it poetry, be it, leather, be it, ceramics, art, music, we practice, it gives us a way to do something that really does evolve us, but it takes our focus away from the evolution itself, and it takes a lot of the pressure off. So we can evolve ourselves through our art. It doesn't matter how we do it. It just means that we're working on it, and it's a wonderful tool. It's such a great tool to gift, to have this. And once you do one art form, this is what's amazing. I think it's true. I don't know. I've seen a lot of artists do this. They start on one art form, before they know it, they're in another art form, and they're just freed by the practice of doing it.
Right. Well, that's
so they transfer the skills.
Yeah, and it's really kind of amusing to me because people think art, right? And immediately they go to drawing, painting, writing, music, but that's only part of it. Just the creation of your life, of picking things up and going, okay, we got this, let's make something out of it. Well, what I call MacGyver art,
Yeah, MacGyver art is great. Well, people don't, they get stuck up in the formalities of it, and the definitions, which means that they're coming from the left brain. It's practice to learn. One has to practice in order to access your right brain on a regular basis. You're going to have to practice it. And what I tell people is that being an artist is really more of a mood than anything else. It's a feeling that you latch into. And once you have the feeling, you can transfer it to any other form. And I'm not just talking about art, You can take that, I used to call it the groove of success when I taught gymnastics, I'd teach kids, I wasn't teaching gymnastics per se, I was teaching them how to latch into this feeling of being able to do something, this empowerment, this feeling of empowerment. And essentially that's what I'm teaching people. Yeah, I'm teaching people how to be empowered. It's a feeling that you have. We all know what it feels like to be a victim, I think. Most of us know what that feels like. But you can also know what it feels like to feel, say something else, like gratitude or love, like, petting your dog or your cat, and you get this feeling, wow, it's such a great, this animal's amazing, and that feeling of appreciation. And it's a feeling, and you can apply the feeling to other things. And as you apply that feeling, you grow the feeling. As you grow the feeling, you grow the art form.
Yep.
So people should remember, it's like a child. A child doesn't ever judge what the child creates, They just sit down and they play with their ball first, and then they move from playing with their ball to playing with a puzzle or something, and they don't think about it. They just move joyfully and freely from one thing to another. They don't sit down and make a committee decision about it. They don't plan it in advance. They don't judge it when they're done. Those are things that we learn to do, and that's how we ruin it. But we have to go through the process of becoming adults and then getting back to being a child, because every artist, I guarantee you, every artist knows that the holy grail is to get back to what they were at the beginning.
Yeah, Sue is one of the folks over at the Awakening Center and in the AwakeNet, and she says she does think that creativity, she makes jewelry and pictures and all that kind of stuff. Creativity is a part of the collective stream of information. And then she goes on to say, too much thinking makes you not do art. It's all about getting out of your head.
Yeah, it's all about just going and doing it. It's, like the Nike thing, just do it. And it really is a matter of, I call creativity divine play. And it means that we just, we are in the Garden of Eden when we're playing and we're being creative. That's the Garden of Eden. And we toss ourselves out of the Garden of Eden when we judge things. And the inner child is such a beautiful thing, but it goes inside the first time it gets criticized. It goes inside and hides. And so the better part of ourselves is hidden most of the time. And it can come out, people, sometimes they think they have children so they can play like a child again, and it's an excuse for that. But artists, I used to also say that there's only three accepted reasons for being eccentric. You can be crazy, you can be old, or you can be an artist. And, at any point in time, I've been at least two of those. But
well, there's the fourth one. You could be rich.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about rich. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could work on two of those then, at least. Yeah, and it's a wonderful thing. I always said, one of the things, I use different art forms for different things, and I found after 9/11, when I was trying to paint my way out of it, that I had so many emotions, and I was receiving a lot of emotions, because I'm a Pisces, and I get everything. I'm a sponge, they call us the sponges, and not having any boundaries made it really hard. I mean, I could close all the doors to my house, it still wouldn't make any difference. I'm still feeling it all. But I couldn't paint. And I realized at that point that my painting was not my emotional outlet, that my paintings have nothing to do with my emotions. And I do make a difference between emotions and feelings. So
there is a definite difference people need to figure out. Yep.
Yeah, well, emotions are on the lower astral plane, and feelings are, the Toltecs say that the world is a feeling, and you basically make your world by your feeling, and it's not necessarily emotions. So anyway, so the way I got myself out of my was able to come to some kind of terms with what had happened, is I use poetry. And I use poetry every time I go through a major transformation. A couple summers ago, I could feel what was happening globally. Feel like an antenna sometimes, or a tuning fork. And there's this terrible feeling in the air. It was around, I guess it was June, And I'm like, you know what? I need to take 7 days. I took 7 days and I wrote myself out of it. But and I went through another cathartic thing. But what I wrote about was what the planet was going through, and how that was how women in the planet, the Earth and women, basically the same thing, and how it was terrible poetry. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, because I could write, I could finally put into words what had been inside of me my whole life, but also every other life of every woman before me. And, the terror and the horror of what had been done to the planet and to women. And I said, I can't carry this anymore. I don't want to carry this anymore. I want to absolve it. I want to not carry the burden of this kind of feeling of victimization or of, hatred or anything like that. And so what I did is I transmuted it through poetry. I don't show it to many people. I only show it to people who are going through that, who maybe need to express it. But it's beautiful poetry. I can't. It did its job, so to say.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, Sue, I think, sort of summed it up. She says you don't get the idea in your own head. It's more you feel something and express it. Right.
It's a channel. It's actually feelings like a channel it feels like a channel experience, because you basically open yourself up to certain things. And that could be your topic. You can get kind of particular about it sometimes. You can say, oh, okay, well, but generally it kind of comes to me when I write, so it's just a way to open up. And as you do it, you realize sometimes it's not out of your own experience that you're writing or that you're creating. Because artists have always, if you look back in time, there's a lot of support for this statement. You look back in time and you look back at if you study art or music or any art form, and you look back at the, like Mozart, like a genius, in music, and you look at what he created, he was actually advancing consciousness through his work. He was at one point expressive of his time period, but also advancing consciousness. Now, the better the artist, the more levels you see in their work. My sister used to say that Shakespeare was on all these levels at the same time. Right. He could write for the really erudite philosopher in the top, row, and he was also writing for the kind of laborer who liked the fight scenes, and all the levels in between. So the better the artist, the more levels they're working on at the same time. Right. The artists that are absolutely geniuses are tapped into something that's superior to themselves. They have learned a skill that enables them to communicate well. So the craft a lot of people confuse the craft of the art form with art. That's not true.
It's a difference between the artist and the artist.
Yes, you can have somebody who's a great artist who has almost no craft, right? Mm-hmm. However, one almost needs to do both, to do well. And so the craft is just the skill level. Right. But a great artist will always be able to walk into any art form and just, work with it. Just, it's like having a different form of clay to a sculptor. It's the same thing. But what they do when a great artist, they can work. You can work at different levels. You can choose your levels if you're pretty advanced. But a lot of people start on just being able to acquire the craft. Now that's fine, right? Because that's what they see, and that's what most of us are not or don't understand what the conscious part of it. But once they sort of master the craft, they can start to turn their attention to other things, because this craft is almost like a distraction to them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a lot like, to put it in very mundane terms. If you've got somebody that's a good cook, they've mastered the craft. They know you're going to do tomato sauce, you're going to add sugar to cut the acid, all this kind of stuff. But if somebody says to them, well, what did you put in it? 9 times out of 10, they're not going to be able to tell you. I to this and a little bit of that, and that's the art form.
That is the art form.
The artisan who will give you a step-by-step recipe.
And I'll tell you why they can't give you the ingredients. Because they were in the right brain the whole time.
Yeah.
See, the right brain doesn't remember these things. It's like I'll be out there surfing, and I'll finally do something I was supposed to do years ago, or was seen other people do, and I cannot remember how I did it. Mm-hmm. I'll give you another example. I used to coach gymnastics, and we'd have an adult gymnastics class, and so we'd all be doing, some stunts, and the head coach would be spotting us. And so one day I'm going to be, I was running down the mat, I'm going to do a front somersault. Well, my left brain started to kick in right as I was jumped up. Yeah. It kicked in, and I don't know what the hell it was talking. It was thinking about something really inane. Mm-hmm. And I almost lost it. I mean, I'm looking at the floor, rushing at my face.
Oops.
And the head coach was fortunately there to spot me, and he turned me around forcibly in midair, and I could see it took a lot out of him to do that. And he said, "Don't you ever do that again." And he meant thinking about it. That's what he meant. A gymnast cannot. You basically think about what you're going to do at the beginning of your run, and before you know it, you're at the end of your run and you've done it. If you think about it while you do it, you can't. If your mind is too slow. If you think, if you were to think about, if you really had to think about what it takes to run, you can do it. Because it's your muscle memory. They say it's your muscle memory, but it's also your right brain. And they say that in surfing, the reason why people are addicted to surfing is that the drop, when you take the wave and you drop down the face of the wave, puts you naturally in the right brain. People love being in the right brain is addictive.
Yep.
It's being in the moment. It's being there. It's really being there. For the first time, you're alive. And art can take you there all the time. Every form of art can take you there. Have you ever seen like a skater, in the Olympics, that's a dancer, a dance skater? And they get in the groove, right?
Oh, yeah. And
they cannot, and the whole audience catches their passion, catches their confidence, catches they're creating this thing in the moment. I'm telling you that skater cannot make a mistake.
Yep.
There's no possibility that in that moment of being in the groove like that they can possibly make any mistake at all.
Exactly. And that's
and
the
you
same
can
thing.
Feel it.
Yeah, and they talk about being in the zone. You can get in the zone and stay there. I mean, that's the ultimate goal.
The ultimate goal.
Yeah, and they have, all kinds of ways to do it. Being in the now, meditating, staying in a meditative state all the time. It's all the same thing. It's a particular frequency in your brain that you get to. And there's all kinds of ways to get there. And whatever way you get there is applicable, at least in my opinion, across the board. So all you have to do is remember getting there. Bringing that feeling.
Yeah, the feeling. You remember the feeling. It's recalling the feeling that brings back that changes the world.
Yep.
As you recall the feeling, you're back in the groove and you're right where you need to be.
And that's so funny because neurologists and so on will tell you there's no difference between remembering something and actually doing something.
To the brain, it's the same. The brain can't. Well, it can, but from the standpoint of science, the brain cannot directly perceive. I believe actually with psychics they do. However, the brain has to receive information through the senses. We know that, and it's neural pathways and all that. But the brain has to think about what the information that it gets, and it has to compare and contrast with other information. A good example, again, I read a lot, and I have a lot of interests. And there's a wonderful book by Oliver Sacks called, it's S-A-C-K-S, famous neurologist, called Anthropologist on Mars. And he writes about a man. Oh, it's great. It's great. And in it, he talks about one of his case studies is Temple Grandin, who's this famous autistic woman, who's a high-functioning autistic woman. And that's her title. The title to the book is actually something she said. She said she felt like an anthropologist on Mars in dealing with ordinary people because she doesn't really understand. She doesn't have her brain functions in a different way.
Right.
But anyway, so there's a story in there about this man who had lost his sight. This is a true story. It's a case study. And it was made into a movie. I can't remember the name of the movie. But he had lost his sight early in his life. And so his brain hadn't learned how to see.
Mm-hmm.
His brain hadn't learned how to see. He became engaged to this woman, and this woman found out that the problem with his eyes is that he had these really heavy cataracts, and those could be removed so he could see again. So for her gift to him, for as a fiancé, she gave him an operation that restored his sight.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't do well with this sight restored because his brain had learned to see. Mm-hmm. And so we take it for granted that, if we have two cars over on the street and there's two cars, one of them is bigger than the other car, that one of them is closer than the one that's smaller.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know that.
Okay.
So because he didn't have the experience of seeing, and he couldn't put things he could not categorize things. And so it was very confusing and overwhelming for him to see. He ends up...
She just said she thinks that movie's called Second Sight with Val Kilmer.
Oh, yes. I was thinking it might be Val Kilmer. Wonderful movie. Another movie based upon Robin Williams, based upon Oliver Sacks's books is a movie called Awakenings.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got Robin Williams and somebody will recall, I'm sure, the other guy, Robert De Niro.
Mm-hmm.
Oliver Sacks happens to be one of my heroes. And, yeah, he's one of my heroes. Joseph Campbell is another one. But perception is one of these things that always interested me. And he talks about how different brains, perceive differently. But in general, the brain cannot receive information directly. It has to be not just brought in by the five senses, but it has to be interpreted by the brain itself. And for that interpretation, it has to bring back information that's stored in the left brain. Now, there's a wonderful book out there called The Other Mind's Eye, I think it's called. Mm-hmm. And that book is about how the brain, when a person first experiences something, they actually experience it through the right brain. Now, the right brain and the left eye are connected, and the left eye and the right eye and the left brain are connected, so they're crossed, right? Mm-hmm. So when a new experience is absorbed, a completely new experience, it comes in through the left eye to the right brain, and then once it's categorized in the left brain. So new experiences are received in a state of complete openness, which is the right brain. There's no comparison or contrast that can be done in that state. It's the left brain that does that. So when an experience is completely new, the right brain is the one that receives it. And this is interesting because if you're going through your own trauma, and this is one of the applications of art forms, is to deal with trauma, emotional trauma. The so-called expression in art, where you can express yourself through your art. A lot of times people are using art to deal with things that they could not deal with in any other way.
Right.
And what art does is it allows you to encapsulate and make it safe. It allows you to put it in outside of you and take an experience that's inside of you that you can't do anything with, and you take it and you put it on paper, or you put it in poetry, or you put it in music, or you put it in theater, or you put it in dance. There's so many ways that you can take that thing that's inside of you that's causing you such pain and take it outside of you and put it outside of you in a way. And when you do that, the process of doing it turns it into something beautiful. Kind of like how a pearl is created. It's actually an irritant to the clam.
Right.
And so what it does is it creates this beautiful pearl around it to make it safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we do with art. I mean, that's one of the forms, that's one of the very valid reasons for being an artist. Most artists have had something in their lives that makes them do the work, that makes them go and it's like a vitamin to them,
Yep.
If they don't have this vitamin, they feel like they can't cope with life. And so it's like a way for them to really evolve, like past the therapy aspect of art, which is, certainly valid, but once you pass that, you're really evolving yourself.
Right. Yeah,
so,
and that's the whole thing. I mean, if you look historically, and you go back to the ancient mystic schools and all this kind of stuff, mm-hmm. one of the things that was always part of any school was you had to journal. You find your patterns to improve, to expand, so on and so forth. Every one of them would tell the student.
You're bringing it to consciousness, yeah. You're bringing the unconscious to consciousness.
Yep. And that's all part of it.
And you could get to the point where it's no longer, you've done all the work, you've healed all the wounds, and there is a chance of getting to that. I know sometimes it seems like there isn't, but there's a chance of getting it all to the conscious state. And then what are you working on?
Mm-hmm.
Because,
you're working on expanding you.
Yeah, you're working on expansion.
Once you get it all fixed, move on.
Yeah, you got it all fixed, so now you're going to drive that car that, you really fixed up really nice, You can have fun with that car, right? And there's so many things you could do with it. There is no end to the subject matter. There's no end to the interest.
Exactly.
You can't be bored. There's no chance to be bored because you could say, okay, well, I'm stuck, you could be in a prison and you could still find a way to create because the thing is that an artist doesn't wait, a real artist doesn't wait for the perfect place, time, materials, or response from other people. Mm-hmm. You don't create because you're creating for someone else. You create because you're creating for yourself.
Right.
It's all about yourself. And, it's not a self, it's about developing yourself. So you can create with I don't know, I remember one time sitting in a restaurant, we were eating, and I had one of those, have you ever seen one of those kneadable erasers, It's a eraser that you sort of knead and you pull apart. I
love those. I used to play with them forever.
Yeah, I know. They're perfect little, almost like, you can make little figurines out of it. Mm-hmm. And it's just what you have is it's like a child. You just remember being a child, and you will know what it is to be an artist.
Yep.
And there's no difference really. There's very little difference. Mm-hmm. And while most people won't buy children's paintings, that's not what this is about. It's not about what you're selling. It's not about even what you're creating, because the painting is really more like they always say that the artist grows like a snake. Like a snake, when it grows to the next level, it sheds its skin. The art that create is that shed skin. It's a record of where you were at that moment in time. You are no longer that skin. You're no longer that piece of art. And so what you're creating is yourself. And as you create yourself, you keep on shedding your skin, and that shed skin becomes a book, it becomes a painting, it becomes or a whole body of work, but you're going on to the next level.
Right. Okay, we have come to info break time. You said the second half that you wanted to give people a chance to experience what you do?
I'd like that. I'd like for them to ask some questions, and what I do is I coach people individuals. I'm also putting together this thing called Creative Caffeine, which will be, I'm thinking it's going to be possibly a radio show like yours, Rhonda. You're inspiring me.
Good.
And it's something I've been thinking about for a number of years. I'd like to know if there's interest in that. And the Creative Caffeine show is kind of like maybe it would be an interview kind of format and then brainstorming at the end of it. The idea with the brainstorming is that people can brainstorm anything in this show, and that we can figure out what they, how they go from there. So I have a lot of information about, many things about, maybe starting a business, about how to work better with a relationship, sort of general coaching is like down to pretty specific stuff sometimes, And mainly what I do is I inspire people to be in their highest creative self. So I have more interest in how do you do that than I do in, I got a problem with my boyfriend, da-da-da-da-da. So, there's more interest in, life path and, your mission on this earth, whatever that is to do. So that said, I still welcome anyone's questions. And if you want to ask me about the books, and I do recommend that people go to my website, and I'm sure we'll have time for that too. But there are some free things.
Yeah, we're putting it in the chat room. Yeah, it's AliyahMarr.com.
Yeah, I would go to parallelminds.com too. There's AliyahMarr.com, and then Parallel Minds, it's spelled with two Z's, ParallelMindzz, as in zebra.com. And subscribing to that mailing list gets you whatever is the free book of the month. So as I produce them, I make them available on PDF format, so everyone can proof my work for me. For free. Yeah. I get people tell me, oh, there's so many mistakes in The Art of Love. I'm like, good, okay. Where are they? So The Art of Love is the book right now. So, if you want a copy of that book, I invite you to subscribe, and then you'll get announcements about what else is coming up. I made a tarot deck a few years ago. Mm-hmm. It's called the Transformational Tarot. It's available now on ParallelMinds.com, and, avoiding sending things and contributing to pollution. So I send these things out as a folder. You put on your computer and play the game as much as you want. Beautiful game. It's created out of my artwork and in words, basically. But I do tarot every day, and every day I find more meaning in it, and it's just amazing. What I wanted to tell people, and I just do want to communicate this, if we can take a few moments, because I'd like to generally inspire everyone to be in their highest creative self at this time.
Yep.
And step into being empowered. Step into being a creator. Step into your natural self. I believe, and I know, actually, that at this time in history is a very unique time, and we have more creative geniuses on this planet than at any other time in the history of mankind. People are stepping into their power.
Right.
And it is like a little spark that just became this huge bonfire. And people are all, I had a contention with a friend of mine last night about whether it's communication and technology that's done this, and I really think it doesn't matter how remote you are, we're all waking up. And that waking up is saying, now it's time to step into our own power. We no longer need other people to tell us who we are or where we are in the universe. We can go into our own selves and determine that.
Right.
So the main thing is just to not be afraid. And it can be pretty fearsome because in the past people have been killed for saying these things, and it can be a little frightening. But it's now time to step into it and say, hey, we can solve all those problems. Every problem, there's not a problem on this earth that we cannot solve. And we have the minds to do it with, and the passion to do it with, the work ethic to do it with, the knowledge to do it with. There is not a problem on this earth that could not be solved overnight if we just get out of our own way. Mm-hmm. And we step into our own responsibility and power. Personal power doesn't mean power over anyone. It means responsibility for your own evolution, for your own authority, and respect of other people's viewpoints.
Yeah, the whole idea of power is power with, not power over.
Exactly. And when we all step into our personal power, when we all creatively empowered, and this is a message I'm here to give, which is that as we each step into the responsibility and joy of creative empowerment, that the whole society then changes. We can't have a society that is based upon disrespect and exploitation anymore when everyone respects themselves, when everyone is in their own personal power, when everyone respects everyone else, when there's respect for the earth. It's not possible to have what we have now on this planet in terms of, the destruction and exploitation and abuse with the proper philosophy. And I call that philosophy natural ethics. And the reason why I call it natural ethics is because I truly think that if people are left to be naturally as they would be in a community of people where everyone knows each other and there's a basic idea of respect for the planet, that these ethics develop as a result. We won't need a police state. We won't need a government. We don't need any of that. Because people by themselves will govern themselves. There's no reason for us to be governed from the exterior. That is actually a form of exploitation. And once we realize that, and we all step into it and be fully empowered, we have a beautiful world. We have paradise on earth. That's what I'm here to say, more than anything. And I want everyone to just join me in this and step into their own best selves, Yeah. So,
definitely. I agree with you 100%. Okay,
so I'm here to help with the particulars in that, too. So if anyone has any particular things they want to talk about.
Okay, well, we have a caller, area code 320. I think this is Sue. Is that you, Sue?
It is me.
Okay, Sue, meet Aliyah. Sue has been in the room cheering you on.
I am what?
What did you say?
You on.
Yay!
Yeah, Sue's in there going, yes, yes, yes.
Sister, Aliyah, sister. Thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You are so right. I am amazed by what you're saying and absolutely what I've been thinking for years.
There we go. That's quantum consciousness. We're all part of the stream.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Consciousness. Yeah. Yeah. So what is it that you do, and how do you know this? I mean, do you know this because of what you do, or what you've thought, or what you've encountered? What falls off the bookshelf in front of you? I mean,
so many, everything, all of that. I have had an artistic bent for my whole life. When I was a small child, my father saw that I had some skill in that direction and encouraged me. And I ended up going to college to be an art teacher, which I never did, because when I got out of college, there were no jobs available. But I did learn to do a lot of art. I did learn that there were different media out there, and I learned how to play with them. And I never quit playing with art.
Well, you can't. I mean, it's an addiction. It's a good
Yeah,
addiction.
exactly.
The
I've
art
never
habit, they
stopped.
call it. Yeah.
And now I make my living being a tailor,
Oh, how cool.
and that is definitely an art too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I used to make my own clothes and, design my own clothes and things like that. And I finally stopped because I need one more art activity, like a hole in the head. I mean, it just kind of
I
like
hear you.
it's too much after a while. I have too many ideas, and that's why I like helping other people, because then I can focus on their particular bent, and it takes me out of my own hyper creativity. Now, I talked to somebody who created I can't remember what some kind of business. It's called Da Vinci or something like that. And I talked to him. He's this super creative person like me again, and he says sometimes he can't sleep because of his creative ideas. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I feel the same way. Sometimes I just can't sleep.
There's too many ideas all the time. But, don't you love the ideas? It's like...
I love it.
You love them so much you can't stop. It is absolutely an addiction.
Well, one thing I found about the creative ideas, which is kind of a cool, we have these hyperactive left brains. And one of the things I found that's really cool, so when your brain is too active, when you're worried or whatever like that, what you can do is you can, in your ego, so you almost need your ego. I mean, there's the unhealthy ego, then the healthy ego. And we can make our unhealthy egos into healthy egos by setting them loose on the idea stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how you have a child that's acting out, and you're like channel the behavior into something constructive. Like, honey, can you help me with this? Like put away all these clothes or whatever like that. I really need some help. And you channel the behavior of your ego into something that's actually constructive. And so what I found is I can send it into this little loop of great ideas and let it play there for a while my spirit self doing something else.
Yeah, because you lose yourself completely.
Well, that's the beauty of it.
I can start making jewelry, and an hour will go by, and it seems like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I had a client who was working on a new business, and she was going from being a non-technical web-related person to having a business totally founded on the web. And she was getting help. Yeah, she was getting help with this, but she wasn't right out of college or anything. She's a long experienced businesswoman. And when I first talked to her, I finally stopped her and said that I think she needed a coach instead of a writer. And so she agreed to let me coach her. And I could tell how frazzled she was. So I said, over the weekend, I have an assignment for you. I said, I want you to go out and play. And she's like, what? I said, I want you to go out and play. And I'll tell you how to do it. I want you to go to thrift stores, to anywhere, and just start taking photographs. Yeah, just taking photographs.
Nice.
And then the other time I told her, and she comes back, so funny, she comes back and she is, the next Monday, when I talked to her, her voice had completely changed. I said, what happened to you? She says, I feel so good. I'm so relaxed. I said, you just needed permission to play. The next time I talked to her when she was frazzled out like that, I said, okay, I'm giving you another art assignment. Again, we're working on her business for her, but, I need to give her an art assignment to help her with the creative self. She was a poet. And I said, I want you to, what do you have on the table in front of you? She said, what do you mean? I said, what's on your table? What are you looking at right now? She says, I'm looking at a coffee cup and a cigarette. I said, I want you to write a poem about a coffee cup and a cigarette. She's like, really? I said, yeah, okay. Then come back, and give me a poem. She gave me the most marvelous poem about how that coffee cup and cigarette had an affair. And they slipped down into the, they were doing it on the couch, and they slipped down on the couch and set the couch on fire. It just cracked me up.
Oh, that's great.
And, we had this wonderful relationship because it's really, a person who is creating a business is creating something just as an artist should be creating something, and she was, a poet as well as a business person. And so she totally appreciated being able to, she wasn't giving herself permission to play, and I was doing that. And so because we're in that, sort of relationship of mentor to, or I should say coach to client, she was accepting what I was saying. And I'm telling you, then there were things like, well, we had like she did a video, and the video was, Talking Heads video. She wasn't happy with that. And I said, well, it wasn't you. So let's make a video that's you. So those kinds of things are, when people need to be brought into what's going to work today is veracity, is sincerity. It doesn't work anymore to step into the part that's uncomfortable. The part that's uncomfortable is you're not self. If you step into the not self too much, after a while you don't live an authentic life. Your authentic life is where your heart is, where your passions are. That's your authentic life.
Yeah. And too, I think you begin to actually feel numb.
Oh, that's
shut
awful.
That side off, and you lose your life. You lose the immediacy. You are not in the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's that joy that inner child gets, and there's that feedback mechanism when you make something.
Mhm.
And particularly if you make something that, like if you're a cook, well, you get the feedback mechanism when you eat it, but then it's just a memory afterwards, unless you took a photograph of it.
Uh-huh.
But when it's, I used to go visit my paintings at night when the light was different, and do these large paintings and cover the walls of them, and to walk up to that painting in different light and to feel its aliveness. It's an extraordinary thing,
Yes. That's one thing about really good art is it's alive. It has almost a breath of its own.
Yeah, it does. Oh, yeah, I have another website for my art if anyone wants to see it. It's radiate.org. It's spelled R as in Robert, A as in Apple, D as in David, I, the number 8.org. So there's some stuff on there that's kind of fun. I haven't updated it recently, but it's a lot of paintings and stuff like that. So how can I help you today, Sue?
Oh, gee. Well, let's see. I have been having a heck of a time actually sleeping at night. And I think, there's just been a lot of unsettling things in my life of late. A lot of things that I have to think about and work through. And I know this. It's not like I don't know that I have to work through. My father just died. And there's been a couple of other things that have happened that have been unsettling, to say the least. And life-changing.
Can you write poetry about it?
Oh, certainly I can write about it.
Yeah, I would journal. I create poetry when I'm in that state. You can draw if you feel inclined to do that. I mean, use an art form and use it to, one of the things that's great is that you can actually really release grief and explore grief. What the thing that's so amazing about art is it has a way of transforming things, And so
grief is really such a beautiful thing, and I
recognize
its beauty.
I was going to say that. Oh, it's so funny. You took it right out of my mouth. It's we're on it.
Like I said,
plane.
sister, we think alike. Okay.
I know. So yeah, I mean, treasure and taste the grief. If you were to take your grief and you put it through every sense, make a poem where every sense expresses your grief. How does grief taste? What is it? What's its touch? You know, allow every sense to fully experience the grief.
Bittersweet.
Yeah. And when you do that, write it to me. If you want to share it, send it to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that particular thing, if I can interject here.
No, please.
There's a lot of grief, which is one of the reasons why there is an epidemic of depression right now.
Mhm.
And people are grieving, letting go of who they thought they were. You know,
yes.
All this other stuff, which is all just normal human emotion. And we've been taught to suppress grief. You know, big girls don't cry. And I think what you suggested is applicable across the board for everybody.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's not a matter of suppressing. I mean, I've been going through every symptom there is, including sleeplessness, and I come and there's a heaviness to things. There's a very big, heaviness and pressure. As I say, we're going through the birth canal. It's true, and the best thing you can do is if you can find a way to, again, either express it and let it out and get it outside of you. See, the art gets it outside of you.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with your feelings. The main thing is to know that you don't own them. You're here to experience them, but you're not here to own them. And the only feelings and emotions that you really own are the ones that you consciously choose. I choose to experience grief, and that is fine. Experience it and let yourself know that that's okay. And you do that by creating something with it. I mean, that's a beautiful way to do it.
Absolutely.
So I encourage people to definitely find a way to bring it through so that it no longer has to be bottled up anymore.
And in a sense, I feel like this grief it's like letting go of something that was special. Loving, letting go of someone that I love, that in a way that I was so lucky. No.
Oh yeah, I know. I agree with you. I mean, and the thing is that you let go of it in its particular, but not in its generality.
Yeah.
I wish I could. I think, Rhonda, we talked about this idea of quantum consciousness, or this idea of the sea of consciousness. And it's been a while since I read this. We talked about quantum physics and how everything is in this consciousness, everything that ever was or will be.
Yes.
And what happens is every now and then it pops up into a material form. But the main thing with grief is to realize that, or any emotion, is to realize that the emotion is almost like the manifestation of what's underneath. So it's important to realize that you're letting go of the particular or the smaller version in order to have the larger version.
Yeah. Very much true.
So the beauty of
is such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
To actually experience loving something that much and letting go of it so that you can have the larger version of that.
Right.
It's part of the beauty of being a physical person.
Yeah. Yeah. A good friend of mine recently lost his father. I think he's on this call today, possibly. And I told him that, I think probably before he lost his father, that when I lost my mother, when she knew she was going to die about 9 months, I think, before she did. And we went through the whole thing with her, actually grieving for 9 months, before she died. We were grieving that she was going to die, and that was quite an experience. And one of the things I realized that when I knew my mother was going to die is I stepped into more of a caretaking role, but I also stepped away from the pettiness that I had between my mother and me, and I stepped into a state of almost grace. And as I lived with her process of dying and went through this enormous grief on my own, when I came to the end of it, and when my mother finally gave up her feisty ways and surrendered to dying, and she had her own moment of grace, and I realized that the experience, like 9/11, was in actuality sublime.
Yes.
And the reason why it was sublime was that I stopped focusing on who was dying and what I was losing. And I shifted into a greater consciousness.
Yes.
That shift is what the experience is about.
Yes. Yes.
It's very healing when you realize that. Your nerves all feel raw. You feel like you can't sleep. Everything feels like, like you're going through this birth canal. And this is all true, and this is what's happening to all of us. And yet if we really focus on the fact that we're going through this enormous, beautiful shift at this time, and we can see it in examples all around us, and we choose to focus on those things, because now it's a point of choice. It's our choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
It's like the Four of Cups, isn't it?
Yes.
Or the Five of Cups in the Tarot.
Yeah.
The Five of Cups in Tarot, and he's staring at the cups that are spilled, but he's got, 2 cups that are spilled and 3 cups behind him?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 That's glass is half full or half empty. Which do you choose?
Well, in that case, 3/5 full. Yeah.
Well, and sometimes having an empty cup is kind of a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes having an empty cup means that you get a chance to fill it with your choices.
Exactly. Well, that's what I've been saying to people, is that this idea of emptiness, of losing things, it's that nature doesn't like a void. So what you need to do before nature fills it with whatever comes along, you fill it with what you want.
Yep.
And I think what you're getting a chance to experience is just tremendous love.
Yes. Yes. That is exactly what I'm experiencing.
And yet it's fine to express grief,
Yeah.
We need that. We need the right, RITE, the right to, a way to formalize and to process grief.
And we miss the physical, because we are physical.
Well, I always think duality is a great thing. I'm having fun with it.
Well, yeah, I can relate to that too.
Yeah. Sometimes I wake up in the morning, I'm like, wow, I get to be a beautiful woman again, I used to wake up in the morning and say, oh, shit, I'm back at this heavy place, Heavy
One of the
3D
things
place.
I do is teach people about sex.
I'm not sure I can teach them about sex, but I sure can teach them about passion and desire and the channeling of energy.
I teach people about how their bodies work so that they can understand them better, so that they can be creative with their sexuality.
Yeah, well, one of the things is that I actually created something called chakra dancing, which is a form of movement. And I think I'm going to finally teach that, so it'd be very interesting to see how that works. It's one of those ideas that popped up some years ago, and I put it down for a while, and now it's popping up again. So we'll see what happens.
It's needed at this time.
Well, yeah, and I think people really need to be physical. They need to feel the physical. The whole thing about the separation of spirit and body is so old school, old paradigm.
Well, if we're not here to experience the physical, then why did we come?
Yeah. We're going to do it. We're going to bring everything with us when we go. We're going to go. We're like going on a journey, and we're going to pack everything. We're not going to leave our heads behind. We're not going to. We're not going to leave our bodies behind.
I want to experience as much as I can and see the beauty in every bit of it while I'm here.
Yeah. Marvelous. Thank you so much, Sue, for sharing that with us. And giving us all a chance to have a little bit of shift right there.
Thank you, and thank you for coming on the show. It's been wonderful, and I'm enjoying it immensely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Good night.
Good night. One thing that I've been wondering about, I don't think of myself as creative.
Mm.
And, it's kind of funny because I left brain. I guess my creativity is taking what's there and making it better, making it prettier.
Mm-hmm.
But having the initial instinct to slap paint on a canvas, a blank canvas, I go, what do I do with it? Totally blank out. And sometimes I would really like to get over that.
Yeah, I know people, that's the horror of this blank canvas stage, that or I don't know what the F I'm doing. We're all at that stage, like sometimes I sit down and I'm like, it doesn't happen very much now at all, but I recognize that stage. Sometimes it takes more play. Sometimes it takes finding a medium that gives you an entree into the act of, say, if it's painting that you want to go into, maybe you need to find a different medium that is more attuned to you. There's certain ones that are harder than other ones to get, to sort of like the learning curve on them is a little harder than another one. And they're all sort of particular to that individual as well. I mean, like I think if you're not a spontaneous person, watercolor might be difficult because you can so easily mess up watercolor as a medium. Mm-hmm. You might want to choose like collage, and look at the work of Max Ernst, and because surrealism is a great way to access subconscious. And I used to do a fair amount of collage. I would do assemblages also, just assemble things, photograph them, disassemble, reassemble, photograph. I am a very spontaneous person by nature. However, I'm also capable of carrying projects to completion and really being very dogged and very focused on it. So I have I have kind of the perfect personality for doing both. But it's still a matter of getting started. And, if you just find something that you can easily play with, that allows you to not sit in judgment of yourself. And I know you're asking that question for a lot of people out there, so it's not just you I'm talking to. And when I taught at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, I got the opportunity to teach a drawing class. I used to teach a lot of interactive programming classes, design classes, and they had this class that somebody else had started, which was a drawing class where they would use tablets and they draw on the computer. It was kind of interesting because it was a life model class, and they had these big computer monitors, and so the only place they could put the model was like near the ceiling. You know, you had to put the model in these these big boxes, and the model was practically standing. You know, I think it was it nude? I think it was a nude drawing class. So the model is completely nude, practically standing with her head on touching the ceiling, and I had some students who were drawing, and it's a lot harder to draw on the computer. It definitely doesn't promote the free motion of the arm. What people don't know when they draw is they start drawing, again with a lot of judgment, so they're using only their fingers. They're not using the whole arm. And I always say that painting or drawing is really a whole body exercise. So, if you want a beautiful line, you use your whole arm. You don't just use your fingers, Right. So I'd encourage you students to back up. Sometimes I'd encourage them, to draw with something else. I want them to get messy. I want them to exit the judgment stage. A lot of these kids would sit there and they had this little judge on their shoulder, and the judge would tell them immediately the minute they did something that they were doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. So we have to all get out of that in order to create something, because that's the left brain, and the left brain is neurotically judgmental. Mm-hmm. And it will hop in there with all kinds of commentary at the most inappropriate time, which is either in the brainstorming process or in the creative process itself. And so there's like a toggle I notice it when I'm creating anything, whether it's the design or whether it's website in general. It's present most effectively when I'm an artist, but what I do is I toggle between left brain and right brain stuff. So the right brain's inspiration, left brain is analytical. And what I do in a process when I'm creating a painting or something, I will step back and analyze it, and then I step back in, but I never let them compete with each other. So if I have to analyze something during the process, which I often do, I've learned how to control that to just being nice suggestions instead of, oh, God, look how terrible that is. It's like you can't go anywhere with that. So, yeah, it's the judgmental side of us that gets in the way, and it's not allowing the child to play. And I had a teacher who told us that, he wanted to give us a prize for the worst drawing, which I thought was great.
I'd win that one.
Yeah, well, and then it was a competition to make the worst drawing, And I think that people really should make an effort to do the opposite of what they do, which is if they're really being very particular, like they've got this style that's extremely tight, then I would encourage them to do something incredibly messy, like finger paint or, play in the mud, roll their bodies on the canvas or something so that they don't, get so picky. It's enormously freeing, and everyone should do it. That's a nice thing about art, and it doesn't matter. No one can really tell you it's bad. I mean, it really is not for them to judge. You could never show it to anyone else, if you really if anyone is really that self-conscious about it, because it's really not for anyone else. It's always for you. It doesn't matter if you're the best artist in the world, you're still, and no one's to say that. There's no one who can say who really is the best artist. There's no way to say that.
Right.
A critic only has their position because someone else says the critic is good. Mm-hmm. But there's no one that can judge art.
Yeah, that's like movie critics. If they slam the movie, I know I'm going to like it. But Yeah,
At least it made them wake up.
Yep. I was blessed in a lot of ways because I went through a stage where I've tried out various art forms, and one of them was painting. And my husband was so funny because I do tend to be a perfectionist. Okay, not with anybody else, but just with me. And I was painting a picture once, and I just couldn't get it the way I wanted it. And I kept futzing with it and futzing with it and futzing with it. And finally, he looked at me and he took the brush out of my hand, said, "Leave it alone. It is perfect as it is. Let it go. Or you're going to screw it up."
Yeah, we used to call that overworking it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy to overwork something. You know, there's the freshness of something. And when I used to teach drawing, I used to say, find the beautiful line. Mm-hmm. You know, find the beautiful line. And people would say, well, you know, your drawings are pretty, you know, they weren't accurate, you know, they weren't proportionately accurate. And but the beautiful lines, you know, and that's my standpoint, you know. There was somebody, I remember when I went to France, and I studied in France, and I went to the Clignancourt area where they, you know, the Montmartre, and they'd have these artists, and, you know, painting in the square, or drawing in the square. They're drawing portraits of people. And here I was, you know, fresh, you know, it's just the first year in that art school. I'd been in art school for a year, and my mother was an art teacher and fourth-generation artist, and I go there, and there's this one woman, and she's like sitting there. This artist is drawing, you know, this portrait of this person, and starting with the eye and making the eye very detailed. Okay. Well, it's not the way you normally do things, and not to say that that's bad, but traditionally what you do is you kind of do a rough sketch for, you know, where the head is going to be. You know, it's like an oval shape, and then you kind of, I just put in 2 lines, one for the, you know, the direction of where the eyes are, and one for where the nose is. If it's a 3/4 view, then it's kind of like an egg with a cross on it, and 3/4, and, you know, straight on, you know, whatever. So it just sort of roughly places things very lightly, and then you start working it in once you know where things are. But to start with an eye in, you know, the middle of a page, and then work from there. It was a beautiful eye. I don't doubt that, but I actually said something, which is really impolitic, and she was very angry at me, and she had a right to be, because I was messing up her business. But in general, you know, that would have been very difficult to rescue that piece, actually, to tell you the truth. But there's certain things that, you know, one learns in art school. One doesn't have to go to art school to do great work. It kind of helps because, you know, you're sort of in a place where everyone is, you know, intent on learning the same thing, and, you know, learning to be artists. And there's some help with that. But, you know, yeah, overworking something definitely, yeah, you can kill it. You can kill it really easily.
And I think that when we are creating our life, or whatever we're creating within our life, we do have, if we slip into left brain, we do have a tendency to overwork it. Yeah.
It's easy to do, and it's good to, it's kind of like, you know, they say when you go into the forest, you leave nothing but your footsteps.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing with your life. If you have a light touch, then, you know, you're not messing with the art form that's already there. You know, it's a different feeling to be light. You know, we've all seen heavy-handed artists. You know, we've all seen people who are very, you know, I used to say some of these conceptual artists, and I kind of am a conceptual artist myself, so it's, you know, they're like hitting me over the head with a sledgehammer, you know, and you know, their concept is just so okay, right, well, I got it, you know, so what?
Exactly.
But you know, I recommend the book Grapefruit by Yoko Ono.
Okay.
A lot of people oppose Yoko Ono because she supposedly broke up the Beatles, but Yoko Ono is an incredible artist in her own right, and this book by her called Grapefruit is conceptual art, and it will just change your mind. I mean, it's amazing, and all it is just these ideas for art forms.
Wonderful. Okay, we are down to the closing bell here. Now, you want to tell everybody all three of your websites.
Okay. All right, so aliyahmarr.com, that's ALIYAHMARR.com, is my coaching site. That's where I help people with whatever they're trying to create in their worlds. I call myself a creative catalyst, or have been calling myself that. Where that's going to go from there, I don't know. It changes all the time, but that's an idea of how I work in the workshops and the speaking and stuff like that. And then and I'm really willing to work with people that want creative coaching, whether it be with their business or with their lives. And then there's radiate.org, which is the art site. It's R as in Robert, A as in Apple, D as in David, I, the number 8.org. And that's my artwork. It's kind of interesting to see what backs me up in terms of my experience. And then Parallel Minds is the new site, and that's spelled with 2 Z's as in zebra, ParallelMindZZ.com. And right now there are 4 books on that site, some in various formats. 2 of them are printed. And if you want to order a book, definitely great. And if you email me at aliyahmarr@gmail.com, and you want like a signed book, let me know. Other than that, make sure you subscribe to the newsletter too. There's a subscription on that Parallel Minds site. Anyone who's a new subscriber gets a book. Right now it's The Way of Love. And the book that you get is a PDF book, beautiful book. There's a new book coming out called Celestial Navigation, which is about the experience of being an artist. And it's filled with paintings.
Wonderful.
Incredible. And that will be PDF form.
Fantastic.
So, appreciate it.
Aliyah, thank you very much. I've had a wonderful time. I hope you have too.
Oh, it was a lot of fun.
You keep in touch and take care of yourself.